What was the darkest day?
We lost 3 of our guys to very bad feet, frostbite, and that sort of stuff, trench foot, where your toes are just totally swollen and distended and you can't do anything. It was just a really dark time because, again, people are looking at you saying, okay, now what?
Tim Jarvis has reenacted 2 of the harshest Antarctic expeditions ever, choosing to do them in the original clothing with the same exact gear used a century ago. Like Douglas Mawson, he pulled a sled alone across the Antarctic for 300 miles. And like Ernest Shackleton, he led a small team in a rowboat for 2 weeks in the most dangerous polar ocean in the world. This is his story. Tim Jarvis. Thank you so much for being here.
Nice to be here.
This is very exciting. I know yesterday you were speaking to some of the brightest minds in America at Yale, and now you're talking to me. So things have gone terribly wrong for you in the last 24 hours.
You mean you're not one of the brightest minds in America?
No,
okay.
I don't think
All
I
right.
am. I don't think, but hopefully after this conversation, maybe I'll be a little.
I'll
bit
manage
more,
my expectations. That's all right. That's all right.
Yeah, maybe I'll be a little bit more enlightened. But I found your story. I think you are fascinating. A researcher, scientist, conservationist, and an adventurer, an explorer, which seems like a crazy title to give someone, an adventurer. But I
can live with it.
You are as true to that definition as possible, and you have a cool accent. I love that.
I've been practicing in the car.
Oh, really?
Coming down here. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm blown away by you. And also, you're 6'4".
5.
Okay, all right, 6'5".
When I stoop, I'm 6'4".
For no reason.
The pressures of life.
Why are you so tall? This seems absurd for an adventurer. This seems like a detriment.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. In the genes.
Yeah,
in the genes. But
I guess.
Pressure of life is compressing me, pushing me down. But
yeah. Now, there's a famous adventurer who you replicated his journey, Sir Douglas Mawson.
Yes.
Also
yes,
6'5".
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Could you tell me a little bit about Douglas Mawson's journey, and then I want to know about your reenactment of that journey. What is his story?
Well, I'm from UK originally, and I moved to Australia, and I moved to a town called Adelaide,
right,
where Mawson, as it happens, is from. He's long since dead, but that's where he's from. And I got there, and I'd been into the polar stuff for a long, long time. And someone said, "Hey, you're the same sort of size. You remind me of Mawson. You're the same sort of size as Mawson, same height as Mawson. You're a scientist from the UK who's moved to Adelaide, like he had done." And he had done an expedition where both his colleagues died. The first one fell in a crevasse in Antarctica, and he went down the hole with the dog team and the biggest sled, which contained 80% of the food. So once that guy was gone, Mawson and the surviving guy had 320 miles to go to get back to camp with only 20% of the food they needed to do it.
Their original mission was to traverse Antarctica, correct?
Their original mission was to traverse a particular bit of Antarctica that he was really interested in. It was near the South Magnetic Pole.
Right.
Because the thing that people need to know is that the South Geographic Pole, 90 south, and the South Magnetic Pole, where your compass gets drawn, where the southern bit of your compass gets drawn to, are nowhere near one another. In fact, they're about 1,000 miles apart.
Is that really?
Yeah, they're a long, long way apart.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so he was trying to get to the source of magnetism. That's what he was really interested in.
And this is around 19...
This is around 1913.
1913.
So just before First World War.
Right.
But once that first guy had died, this 320 miles suddenly on only 20% of the food you need to survive looked really daunting. And sure enough, halfway home, the second guy died of what Mawson described as fever. So he wasn't sure, basically.
This is Mertz, right?
Mertz, exactly right. Xavier Mertz, Swiss cross-country ski champion, doctor. He was a very, very cool sort of guy, very accomplished guy. But he died horribly in Mawson's arms. He'd soiled his pants. He was hallucinating. He was in convulsions. And, it was pretty traumatic for Mawson. And then Mawson was the sole survivor of the trip. And everyone said, look, surely, given the state Mawson was in, did he need to maybe cannibalize Mertz after his death? And so my idea was very simple: do it the same as Mawson had said he'd done it. But in my case, I traveled with this increasingly nervous Russian guy who, had the need arisen, I might have needed to, take a bit of his thigh or something like that. Anyway, I can report that he's okay.
Yeah. He had some nice legs, though.
Yeah. They're a bit bony, but I lost 75 pounds in the effort of just trying to do it with the same calories as Mawson.
Right. So talk to me about that. So break that down. So you got to the true edge of Antarctica.
Yes, I'm right on the coast of Antarctica at this stage, in a very, very heavily crevassed area full of big glaciers, and it's dangerous terrain. And, the temperatures fluctuate between, in Celsius terms, minus 15, minus 20 degrees. So it's actually very similar to Fahrenheit.
Right.
When you get below zero to that amount, it's roughly the same kind of number.
Right.
And then all the way up to sort of quite warm temperatures is sort of, 5 degrees above.
Very warm.
Very warm. So yeah,
scorching almost.
Yeah,
Jeez.
that's right. But I mean, the problem is it makes everything wet. So I'd rather have cold all the time, because as soon as stuff gets wet,
right,
I would find that I would sleep in my reindeer skin sleeping bag, and it would get soaking wet during the course of the night, because I'm sleeping on the snow, right? Because Mawson had lost most of his stuff, so I copied what he didn't have.
To the inch, like you.
Yeah, absolutely everything.
All the equipment.
Leather boots, hobnail boots.
Yeah, what does that look like? Like, so what do you have with you? What are you wearing?
So look, back in the day, they used to wear cotton smocks, literally about maybe twice the thickness of a shirt that someone would wear to the office. Nothing really, just enough to keep the wind off.
Right.
And the main emphasis is on breathability, because Antarctica is the driest, windiest place in the world. So you need the clothes to breathe, but keep the wind out. You're not worried about waterproofing, because it's the driest continent in the world also. We've had some places no snowfall for 150,000 years, so it's like very, very dry. Wow. So you're not expecting to get wet. So you're wearing that. You wear woolens underneath, and you wear leather boots, and with just little hobnails, almost like a golf stud on the base of it, just to give you some grip.
And you had to get these custom manufactured. Like, they don't make
everything
this anymore.
Everything made from scratch. A lot of research.
Wow.
To basically rebuild all the gear for the trip. And in fact, what I did was, there's an English actor called Kenneth Branagh who'd been in a show about Shackleton, and they had borrowed one of Mawson's outfits from a museum and copied it for the Shackleton show, a modern show they made, like a drama program. I then borrowed some of those outfits to use for my real life Mawson expedition. So everything went full circle.
That's a huge compliment to the costume artist.
It is.
That they created something that was close enough that you're like, yeah, I'm going to take this to an expedition.
Yeah.
Although, a Halloween costume.
Although it performs pretty badly, I have to say. I mean,
oh, really?
It's it is what it is. It's just not up to the task of really the extreme conditions.
And you're trekking across this stretch of Antarctica with just a sled.
Just a sled, same weight, wooden sled, copied from the original in the museum, which came back because Mawson made it. Everyone else died, but he made it, so I copied the sled exactly. I copied all the clothing, ate the same kind of food. Only thing I didn't do was eat people, and the idea was to see whether it could be done with the food that he said he had without the need to eat.
Did you eat dogs?
I ate the equivalent of dog meat. That was the thing. I couldn't eat dogs, so I ate kangaroo.
Oh, really?
And kangaroo meat is very similar to dog meat in that it's just pure protein. There's no fat.
Interesting.
So I actually had a nutritionist really look carefully at that. So I didn't want any kind of cheating.
Right.
You take stuff that's got a bit more calories and people are going to say, aha.
And that makes a big difference.
Makes a big difference.
And did you prepare it the same? Because I know that Mawson would boil it and they would kind of add some things to it to try to make it almost like stewy. Did you do things similar?
Yeah. They make stuff called hoosh, which is basically a pot of boiling up everything you've got. You put a bit of whiskey in, you put tea, you put sugar, you put congealed animal fat, you put a bit of dog meat, and off you go. And it's not great, but when your body needs it, it's good.
Yeah,
tastes okay.
You didn't eat any of the liver though, right?
Didn't eat any of the liver. The idea was to have a control experiment because they ate dogs, and the idea was to see if I did everything else the same, eating only a fraction of the amount of food you need to really survive in those places. Because you got to imagine that you're putting out more calories than a Tour de France rider on a daily basis, about 10,000 calories you're burning just with the effort of pulling a sled and the cold. And then I'm only eating 2,000 calories. So you're burning maybe 30 Mars bars worth of energy a day, and you're consuming about 4.
Yeah, you're at a deficit.
So you're at a deficit big time. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'd finish my food by 10 a.m.
Oh, wow.
And I had to wait till the next day to have the next small amount of food. And it's really hard when you try to go to sleep at night in a wet reindeer skin sleeping bag on the surface of the snow with all the cold coming through on your own, with these incredible blizzards with these wind speeds threatening to tear apart the fabric of this old tent.
Yeah.
Some nights I'd have to sit up and just push my back against the fabric of the tent, stop the the blizzard's just tearing the whole thing to pieces. Because if the tent goes, you've had it.
Did anyone try to talk you out of this?
Well, it's too late once you're there. That's the trouble. It's like a parachute jump. It's one moment of stupidity, and the rest is kind of gravity. You know.
But this is months of stupidity when you're planning it, getting a costume.
What are you trying to say? Yeah. No, I mean, I think the difficulty with this kind of stuff is that your reputation is everything. So if you say you're going to do something, I like to follow through on what I say I'm going to do. And as soon as you start pulling the pin because things get a bit tough, then your reputation becomes tarnished and sort of game over. So you've got to see it through.
That's what's interesting about you and Mawson and Shackleton. Comparing you to them, they were in a time and place where they didn't really have a choice. Mawson was in the situation where he was a researcher and used the best equipment of his time. And once Mertz died, he had no choice but to go back. And what's interesting about you is that you had a choice, but you chose to persevere through that, which I think is significant.
It's true. There are a couple of things. They used to call them iron men in wooden boats. They travel in wooden boats, but they're iron men, and I always like that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. One of the big psychological problems with doing an old expedition as a modern person is that all this other equipment exists that would make things a hell of a lot easier, like a GPS, Gore-Tex, Mars bars.
Stuff you use in your everyday life, like
engines,
flashlights, things like that.
Anything to make life easier, but you're deliberately depriving yourself, whereas those guys just use, like you said, state-of-the-art stuff. It may have been brutal, but at least...
Psychologically, they didn't think, I wish I could just have my cell phone.
That's right.
Like had the pleasure of modernity that then was taken away.
That's right.
And those
that
modern
makes it really
comforts
difficult.
And everything.
It does make it difficult. Look, psychologically, it's not something I really anticipated until I got down there. And then suddenly that weighs really heavy on your mind. And then, but the thing about humans is that we're so adaptable. And this is kind of both our strength and our weakness, I think. But we're so adaptable that after about a week, you start to become that person, particularly when I used to look at John. His real name is Evgeny, by the way, but I would look at him, and as the beard started to appear and he started to get more emaciated and the clothes started to get more dirty and ragged, he started to become those people I'd seen in those early images. And you derive a strength from seeing them. You think, well, we need to live up to the uniforms we're wearing, and it becomes almost like a kind of badge of honor. It's really quite something.
So talk to me about like the first week. So you're on the ice, you're walking, you feel pretty good, I imagine, because you've been training up until this point.
Yeah.
What point does it start to feel like, this is really challenging? This is really difficult?
Well, to be honest, it was challenging right from the outset because, yes, we were sort of relatively fresh, but at that stage in the expedition, Mawson and Mertz still had a few dogs left. So even though the dogs were weak, they'd lost the big dog team down the hole,
right?
But they still have 5 or 6 dogs left in the smaller dog team. And so those dogs continued to pull until they could pull no more, and then they fed the weakest to the strongest. But even up to about 10 days in, they were only just... They killed the last dog, Ginger. The poor old Ginger got the chop and then was eaten by Mawson and Mertz, who consumed everything: paws, ears, all the offal, liver, kidney, brain. They consumed everything.
That was the most interesting part. That's why I brought up liver before.
Yeah,
is because Mawson was a great leader. It seemed like from the text, and he was with Mertz, and Mertz is in this tent and he's dying and he's shriveled and he's just choosing not to walk, and he's, I guess, enduring some type of psychosis.
Yeah.
And he is having a hard time eating. So Mawson, in his charity, says, hey, let me give you the better parts of the dog. And like the liver, some things that are really nutritious and nutrient dense. And I'm going to eat like the paws and the brain and things like that.
Yeah.
And that potentially could have spelled error for the mission. Can you explain on that?
Yeah, look, Mawson, I think, thought he was doing the right thing by feeding Mertz the offal, so the liver, the kidneys, things like that, because they were softer, more palatable, because the dogs by this stage were just skin and bones. So he thought, let's not give him the stringy bad stuff, let's give him the really rich stuff. Maybe he'll come good. And of course, inadvertently, he was poisoning him, because had he, this is where you go back to some of the Norwegian explorers, polar explorers. Norway is up near in the Arctic, and they used to talk to the indigenous people, and they really knew you just don't eat the offal of any animal, polar bear, dog. You just don't do it because they contain toxic levels of vitamins for people. So it's vitamin A toxicity is what he got, and livers contain a lot of that. So he thought he was doing the right thing. Actually, he was killing Mertz.
Oh, that's wild. So you are on your journey, your expedition, and about how long are you traversing the Arctic with a sled, or the Antarctic with a sled?
So, I mean, look, I've done many trips down there, but that particular one was 47 days. It took me before I sort of fell over the finish line at the end, having continued on with John for 24 days. So the idea was that we'd either cover the same distance as Mawson and Mertz had covered before Mertz died, or taken the same amount of time that they were together, which is 24 days, and then John would be extracted regardless by a medical team, and then I'd be left on my own for the next month. And just see how I fared, basically. And if I didn't turn up to the end point, they'd assume that something was wrong. It was kind of, it was challenging.
Yeah. And I'm curious, so there's two components of this that are obviously fascinating, the physical and the mental. So I guess first, the physical. You're losing weight every single day, working at a deficit.
About 2 pounds a day you're losing, weight.
2 pounds a day?
2 pounds a day, yeah.
And are you getting injured? Like, how are you keeping your body fresh? Like, what is the strategy for that?
You're just not. I mean, as I say, you really rely on two things, food and rest to make any kind of recovery down there. And, the food was just woefully inadequate. I'm sort of 7,000 calories in deficit a day. So it's 22 Mars bars worth of energy a day in deficit, what I actually need. And then, lying in the sleeping bag where you can normally regenerate in a modern expedition because you've got mats underneath you stopping the cold coming through. No. I'm in a wet rain skin sleeping bag.
No recharging.
And the difficulty is that thing gets wet because my body heat escapes, melts the snow beneath me, makes it wet. When I get out of that in the morning, roll it up, put it on the sled and pull it around in -20, it freezes solid. So to get into it in the end of the evening, you're just cracking it to get it open, to unroll it. And then it's frozen. And then you get into a frozen thing, and then your body heat obviously warms it up, and then you're wet again, and then the cycle repeats itself. So
you're just either freezing or wet.
You're just going downhill, quickly.
Right.
Quickly.
And the first half of the expedition, how does that compare to the second half physically?
So look, the second half was in two halves. So John was there for the first half, and I was on my own for the second. So once he'd gone, suddenly all the problems, all the judgments you've got to make about whether the terrain is too crevassed to travel a particular route, whether you think the tent's going to withstand the next blizzard, injuries you have, equipment failing, just a bit of humor in the evening and just having a good old chat about something. Right. Suddenly you haven't got anyone to share that with, and then you're in a world of pain just on your own. And that actually is psychologically very challenging. And it actually felt like he died because suddenly there was this space where he had been, and now you're on your own in the Antarctic. It's pretty unforgiving as a place.
I imagine that moment when I read, Mawson's account, that he's in this tent holding Mertz, and then Mertz passes away. The feeling of having another human being with you to then silence. And in the wind, you're the only person to hear it. You are completely alone. It's just you and your own thoughts.
That's right. Like many of the critics who'd said, look, one of the main arguments was used for the fact that Mawson may have needed to eat Mertz to make it. The calories his dead body gave actually got Mawson through. One of the things was, apart from the amount of food he needed, was the fact that he stayed for a couple of days with Mertz at that point when he died. Right. And people said this was him coming to terms with the decision to take some of his flesh. I personally think, you've been through everything with this guy, and, and it's a very lonely place. It's a brutal place, really lonely. And, even a dead body provides some sense of companionship. I know it sounds strange. Right. And I just felt that he was just coming to terms with the fact that he was going to leave his friend behind and sort of walk away. And that's tough to do. Yeah.
Now talk me through the psychological aspect. So are you meditating throughout this? Like, what is happening internally?
Yeah. So look, expeditions are all about managing real extremes of mood mentally. And the trouble with an expedition where you're on a starvation ration is your blood sugar levels are low, you're extremely cold, you're completely exhausted, and it's very difficult to remain focused and remain positive. You kind of go from sometimes appreciating the enormity of what you're doing and really kind of getting off on that. Other times you're very kind of goal focused. You think, if I could just get to the end of this next hour, I can, reuse that tea bag one more time and see if I can get anything out of it. Other times you think about, friendships you've had with people that are now no longer part of your life, and you go off on this kind of great, journey in your mind. Other times you kind of, you just think of things and you intellectually kind of analyze them. Other times you think, look, I'm just a guy at the bottom of the planet, spinning around at 20,000 miles an hour, going around a relatively insignificant star somewhere on the outer arm of a fairly insignificant galaxy somewhere in the universe, and you just get really esoteric about it all.
Yeah.
So I guess that's kind of meditative in some way.
Right.
And, you come back with a different appreciation for life. You spend so much time on your own and so much time worried about dying that you actually come back and really live life more fully, actually, as a result.
Are you thinking about your girlfriend, wife, anything like that? Is there
yeah. I mean, she was my girlfriend at the time. And then I thought, well, I think we should take this further, because you're there and all the important things in life, assume a far greater, place and you see perspective. And I thought, well, I'll ask her to marry me when I get back if I can make it through this thing. So
and did you?
I did.
Oh, wow.
I did.
I don't know how you bring that up. I don't know if you're like, hey, compared to the Antarctic wasteland, you're not too bad.
Yeah, that's right. Relatively speaking, you're good compared to the terrible stuff.
Yeah. That's
right.
wild. So you just landed, and how quickly after you ended the expedition did you propose?
Well, I got to the end of this thing in 47 days, and I was in very poor shape, of course. And
you were already on one knee, like that's perfect.
I was already groveling, and it's been that way ever since. So so I'm at a low ebb, and in Mawson's case, he missed his ship home, by the way, when he survived.
That's the craziest part of the story. Would you mind explaining that?
Yeah. So he gets to the end. He decides to rest at a little cache of food about a day out from the hut where he thinks there may just be people who are there to meet him from the expedition team. And he thinks, I'll just sit this out. This is another reason that the people who said he must have cannibalized Mertz gave. They were saying, look, this is him coming to terms with the fact that he's going to meet his other colleagues and he's not going to be able to look them in the eye, and they're going to see that he committed this terrible sin. But actually, he was just so exhausted, I think, that he just stopped to eat this cache of food.
It's reasonable.
And in so doing, 24 hours elapses. Meanwhile, the ship leaves. So his voyage home goes in that 24-hour period that he chose to rest, which was kind of disastrous. And as he gets to the hut, he sees the steam on the horizon and the ship sailing away. Now, looking at it, subsequently, it's probably saved his life because he was just so completely knackered that, he had no opportunity to, he wouldn't have made through a rough journey in a sailboat across the Southern Ocean, you know. And he spent, a month just getting back to some sort of normality in the hut. And I went through a not dissimilar thing. I mean, I arrived at a base ultimately, and I had about 4 weeks there just resting and trying to recuperate.
Wow.
And before I too got on a ship, and it was a 2-week journey to get back to.
And what does that recuperation process look like?
Civilization. You start eating normally, you're getting a lot of rest, but it's a bit like someone who's really thirsty, who sort of comes out of the desert. You can't just give them a glass of water or something. You've got to just allow them to really slowly bring themselves back round. And so I had to just start. I had to continue eating more or less the same sort of stuff, but just in slightly bigger quantities, build myself up over 3 or 4 weeks.
Now, can you tell me about the 24 hours of reaching basically the finish line? Like, what is happening to you psychologically at that point? Your body's probably at its worst. Mentally, are you at your worst?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with expeditions is you get so good at breaking down the total into small pieces that actually, funnily enough, even when you get to the last day, it doesn't feel like it. You just think, close but no cigar. 46 days, 47 days doesn't make any difference. I've still got to keep it all together. You're looking for crevasses. You're looking to make sure you keep going. And I knew in my mind that we had one experiment to do right at the very end of the expedition, which was for me to deliberately climb into a crevasse and then see if I could get myself out on the rope, hand over hand, like Mawson did. This is like just an experiment we did, because he had fallen in and he got himself out hand over hand.
With the
Many
sled.
people said, "How could he do that?"
Yeah, the sled, I guess, trapped him in the crevasse.
It snagged on the top of the crevasse, and it was just lucky. And he managed to. He'd fallen in a few times before, and so the rope that was attached to his waist that he used to pull the sled, he'd made knots in. so that in the event he did fall in and the sled kind of acted like an anchor, he could climb up the knotted rope, and that's exactly what happened. So I did the same thing. So I knew that was coming, and I just put all my energy into just trying to get out, and then just fell in a heap at the end, And you don't even celebrate. You're just too tired. You're just pleased you're not doing it again, because I had no rest days for 47 days. So I mean, the next day you just sleep and
Are you spiritual?
I'm not a kind of denominationally religious kind of person, so I don't have any particular faith per se, but I've had some pretty interesting experiences where, I've really felt that there was something else there, and in my mind-altered state, I even you got the thrumming of the guy lines of the tent in a blizzard, and you hear voices, and I heard the footfalls of a person walking outside the tent, things like that when I was there, and you just wonder, what that is. Could be just your state of mind, but is it something else, or is it something within you that sort of emerges when you put yourself in this state of duress? I don't know.
Right. So you finish that expedition, and you get some public acclaim. A lot of people are really excited, both for you completing this, but also completing it with period-specific gear.
Yeah,
which
that's
is
right.
remarkable at the time.
Yeah, not least of all the Mawson family. They were very happy. It was a big media thing in Australia because Mawson is he was on the old $100 bill. He was a famous kind of guy.
Yeah.
And so a book came out, a film came out.
And he's vindicated. He's not a cannibal, which in my opinion, I'm like, even if he was a cannibal, like, who really cares?
I wouldn't have judged him. And it wasn't my central thing. I just wanted to honor him, but it became about the cannibalism angle for the media, and that's the way it was. But yeah, I was happy. The family were happy. And, I didn't ever claim I'd done exactly what he did, because of course he was down in Antarctica for a lot longer than me,
sure,
doing stuff before that accident and before that 47-day trip. But all was good. And then
you could have just called it quits. You could have gone to researching, gone to environmentalism, just focused on that.
Yeah,
that probably would have been a little easier.
Not in my personality. That's the trouble.
Someone reaches out to you. Someone very interesting.
So I got a call from Alexandra Shackleton, who is Sir Ernest Shackleton's granddaughter, the Honourable Alexandra Shackleton, I should say. And she said, congratulations, great achievement. Now, I've got another challenge for you, and that began a 7-year process of retracing the journey of Shackleton. And I've done lots of expeditions. I've only done 2 the old way. One was Mawson, and now I was embarking on this Shackleton expedition.
Now, Sir Ernest Shackleton is how I became aware of you in the first place. I had read Endurance.
Yes.
I actually talked about it on the podcast.
Yeah.
Podcast before. Yeah. It's just an amazing book. And more importantly, just an amazing story.
Yes.
And I became enamored with Shackleton, both as like a man and as a leader. And I guess for me personally, I'm 26. I sometimes have a hard time, like, sort of grasping what masculinity means. And like, I sometimes like wrestle with what those terms are and like how to really situate myself like as a leader and who can I look to. And Shackleton became one of those people for me. I really admired him so much, and I just thought he was an amazing person.
Amazing, yeah.
And I'm curious, would you mind just breaking down sort of like his original journey and what his original voyage was supposed to be and what ended up occurring?
Yeah, well, Shackleton was around in the heroic era, just like Mawson and Scott and Amundsen, the Norwegian, and in fact Peary from the States. They were all these heroic era explorers. And actually, Shackleton did 4 expeditions. His first one, he was with Scott on an expedition to Antarctica.
Is that the Nimrod?
Nimrod was Shackleton's second expedition. It's the first one that he led, but the second expedition that he'd been on after. He was on Discovery with Scott. Nimrod was his first one, where he tried to get to the South Pole on foot, turn round.
Yeah. With Mawson, I think.
Mawson was there too, interestingly, but Mawson was on another. Often these expeditions had teams that did different things. Mm-hmm. So Mawson went off again to try, with this fascination with the magnetic pole, off he went on a journey to try and get to that. In fact, he did do it. And Shackleton, meanwhile, went for the geographic South Pole, which is the big one.
Right.
And he famously turned around 97 miles from his goal, his life goal. And when he got home, he said to his wife, I thought you'd rather a a live donkey than a dead lion. And but he saved everyone in the course of doing that. Whereas a lesser person might have just ploughed on and sacrificed the team in pursuit of his ego, really, which he didn't, which is amazing.
Yeah.
He then went down again. So after that, Scott and Amundsen reached the South Pole. Scott, of course, died with everyone. Amundsen made it, and that goal had been achieved. So Shackleton went on his famous expedition, which was to try and cross the whole of the continent, one side to the other, via the South Pole. And everything went wrong on that trip. And the survival journey that emerged out of the kind of ashes of that expedition were really a far bigger story than the original goal of crossing Antarctica would have been.
Yeah. So I guess in short, and correct me if I'm wrong in any of the details, him and a crew of 52, 53 men?
It was 27 plus him. So it was 28 men on that trip.
27 men, they leave Buenos Aires, they go to Antarctica. They have this wooden ship called the Endurance. They get stuck in an ice sheet, and then now they're stranded on an ice sheet for basically like 6 months, 8 months, something like that.
Yeah, they get stuck in the ice. The ice closes in around the hull of the ship, crushes it.
Yep.
And in the end, the only thing holding it up is the fact the ice is packed around it tightly. As soon as the wind changes direction, ice goes apart, down goes ship. And they've been stuck for 10 months on the ship.
Right.
They then live for another 5 months on the same ice that had claimed the ship.
Which is just insane.
In just a series of really precarious camps. One was called Ocean Camp, one was called Patience Camp. And, you know, things were looking pretty bleak.
And this ice floe is basically breaking in half every couple days. They're on it, and it's like a mile long, and then it breaks in half, and now it's half a mile.
Oh, yeah.
And then
it became
a quarter of a mile.
It became smaller and smaller and smaller. In the end, it was about the size of a tennis court, and they were just on this thing, 27 of them, under 3 of the upturned lifeboats from the ship, which are these 22-foot keelless rowboats, basically. Yep. Killer whales in the water, winter approaching, not enough food. You know, what comes next, you know.
Yeah, just floating in the ocean, basically, aimlessly.
Yeah, and he'd been, meanwhile, Shackleton has got them playing soccer and you know, doing lectures and all the kind of stuff you don't do if you think you're going to die. So he was clever because it made people feel that he had the measure of these conditions and that somehow he was going to get them out of it, you know, because he wasn't panicking.
Right.
It's just amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible leadership. And then they basically float on this ice until they get close to a little island, and not even close, really, 5 days out from a little island.
That's right.
And then they all jump on some boats.
Yeah.
And they row through a storm in the Antarctic, like the most insane shit ever. And they land on this little island.
I mean, you know, look, even though I've done what I've done, I still marvel at that trip because, I mean, you know, their hand was forced. The ice broke up underneath them one night, and so they put the boats in the water, like you said, 5 days. But, I mean, these are keelless rowboats with no deck, with mountainous seas. The temperature is freezing. The water is freezing, literally freezing. The only reason it's still liquid is because it's kind of saline. Otherwise, it'd be just totally solid. And you know they're hypothermic. They just don't have enough food. They have no rest. You know, one guy's bailing constantly with a bucket to stop the whole thing just going under. They can't feel their hands.
There's one moment in the book that's so fascinating where they say they would rather be in the water because at this point the rowboats are full of water. Yeah. And they would rather be in the water because the water is warmer than the air.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
An insane concept to even imagine.
Yeah, you know, look, I know what it's like, and it is, you know, it's just brutal, really. I mean, to make that decision.
So they make it basically, and they've been now on ice they haven't been on solid ground for over a year.
Yeah, they 22 months actually. Been 20, but if you include the journey down from the UK, and you know,
it's insane.
It's 22 months.
And I'm reading the book, and they finally make it to land, and I go, "Oh, thank goodness, it's over."
Yeah,
and that's kind of where the story starts.
That's right,
in a way.
That's right,
and this is where your story starts, also.
That's right.
I mean, what happens for them, and what do you recreate?
So they get to this island called Elephant Island, named after elephant seals that live there, not the real type, obviously, and it's just on the way to nowhere. It's just the remote, jagged fang of rock sticking out of the Southern Ocean. No human population. To this day, it's just too remote, too inhospitable. And, you know, they all celebrate. You know, they've saved themselves as far as they're concerned. Shackleton knows better. He thinks we're not going to survive the winter. It's coming fast. Only thing for it is to try and effect some sort of rescue mission. Trouble is, nearest place is 900 miles away, 800 nautical miles away across the roughest ocean in the world. The only vessel they've got is a kind of rowboat, basically.
Yeah.
So he takes the 5 strongest men, puts planks on the most seaworthy of the 3 rowboats, taking them off the other 2 boats, and leaves 22 of the guys behind on Elephant Island and gets together with the 5 strongest, and off he goes across the Southern Ocean on this perilous rescue mission.
Insane. And basically the stakes are he has all of his men on Elephant Island, and he's going on a rowboat with 5 other guys, and they're going out into this uncharted ocean trying to hit a tiny little island of whalers. And if they miss the island in either direction, they're dead.
That's about right.
And all the men that he brought with him that he was supposed to care for are also dead.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. He doesn't get through. Everybody dies, basically.
Right.
And you know, even if he misses South Georgia, which is the name of the island he's trying to get to, boat with no keel, which is the kind of vertical thing sticking out at the bottom of the boat on modern yachts, you don't just turn around and have another go. You see it going past in the rear view mirror. You can't turn around and sail back because the winds and currents are pushing you kind of north.
Wow.
And you can't tack upwind in a boat with no keel, right?
I didn't realize
you can point that way and try and kind of climb out of the lobster pot, but in reality, you're just going to get pushed backwards.
Oh, that's crazy.
So he had to get there, and he had to land where he could. If he'd missed it, the next land is Namibia in Africa, about 3,500, 4,000 miles further on.
He only brought rations for 4 weeks anyway.
You know, they're already in terrible shape.
Right.
He lands, but he lands on the wrong side. You know, he lands on the southern side of the island, and the whaling stations, they're on the northern side, and in between is a mountain range, and no one's ever climbed it.
Yep.
And he has no climbing equipment. He has no climbing kind of background. He's got one little length of rope. He's made some crampons, you know, the spikes on the bottom of the boots, taking nails out of the packing cases from the boat, you know, the ship's stores.
Yeah.
And, you know, off they go into the mountains of South Georgia, which is technical mountaineering with nothing, basically. No tent, so they can't stop. If you stop, you die.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
And he crosses in the time that even Reinhold Messner, the world's greatest modern mountaineer, has been unable to replicate, wearing plastic boots, Gore-Tex jackets, sat phones, GPS, you know, Mars bars probably, you know.
Yeah.
You know,
and
incredible.
What's remarkable about that leg of the journey, I guess 2 legs, right? That's what you did. You recreated that. Yeah,
so we rebuilt the boat. I spent years researching, rebuilt the boat, learned to traditionally navigate. So, you know, using a sextant to get an angle to the sun.
Yeah, so talk to me about the sextant. This is so remarkable to me because I'm thinking like, okay, I'm here on Elephant Island. I got to get to southern Georgia.
Yeah.
I'll have my GPS. I'll look at the stars. Like I know where I'm going as long as I'm going the right way. Yeah. That's not really true.
No, that's true. I mean, look, a sextant is one of those devices where you look through it and it gives you an angle and you set it and you take an angle to any celestial object, moon, sun, stars. The difficulty Southern Ocean is you just don't see them. You know, it's foggy, it's claggy, you can't see anything, and you've got to see if you're going to use the sun. You've got to see the sun when it's at the high point in the sky where you are. There's no point seeing it when it's low on the horizon. It's got to be at that high point. So on the occasion you see it, you've got to kind of look at it, take a bearing, write down the numbers, do the calculations, and then look at it again a couple of minutes later. If it's climbed higher, you've got to then disregard the last reading and you keep going until it starts to dip, and then you take that one and you run the numbers, and then you work out your latitude. So where you are on the planet on the horizontal lines, north-south, you know. It doesn't tell you where you are east-west. That's guesswork, all right? That's just, you've got to kind of that's dead reckoning.
Yeah.
And, you know, he has 2 storms, a hurricane. He's got seas which are 75 feet from peak of one wave to trough of the next. You know, it's brutal stuff. Boats threatening to capsize the whole time. And, you know, he makes it. He makes it.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
Crosses the mountains, raises the alarm, saves all the men. You know, it's just... Edmund Hillary said it's the greatest survival journey of all time.
Yeah, it might be. Now, you were crazy enough to recreate it. So talk to me, what was the challenge like while you're, you know, leaving Elephant Island, basically, in your own tiny little topless rowboat?
Yeah.
What happens to you, you know, in the first week? What's happening psychologically?
So, you know, we built a basic deck like he did, but, you know, it leaks a lot. And you know, we did this voluntarily, right? So, you get in the boat, you push off, you're not sure it's the right thing, but you do it anyway. And something then switches. As soon as you're 200 yards offshore, you're on Shackleton's journey. There's no going back. So all you got to do is kind of steel your resolve to just make the first step, and then the rest is kind of the same journey as his, and you got no choice. And, I never forget pushing off, and we were not even a day in, and a massive iceberg appears in front of us, and I thought, how the hell are we going to get around that? And I tried to sail downwind of it, because your little toy mast you got with a little sail, and one of the guys on board who was a very, very good sailor, the captain, because I was the leader of the expedition, Nick, good friend of mine, skipper, and he said, Christ, don't ever do that again. Don't go downwind, because it's like a city block with apartment buildings on it. If you go downwind of it, they block out the wind. The iceberg blocks out the wind, and you're just sitting dead in the water, and then the iceberg runs you over. So don't do that. You've got to stay up. So you're learning all the time.
Oh, that's crazy.
Learning all the time.
So you're getting dumped on with
all the time,
water and rain for 2 weeks basically?
Yeah, 2 weeks. 2 weeks of big sea state. We had a couple of calm days. The rest were not. And so you got waves crashing in. You're standing in kind of knee deep, essentially freezing seawater. Can't feel your toes. You can't feel your hands. Your clothing is totally wet. You're borderline hypothermic. You do an hour on the helm of the boat, then you bang on the hatch. Next guy comes up, you go down, and you spend the next 5 hours trying to dry your clothes with your body heat, and then you repeat. That's the way it works. And you're in a seated position, sitting on top of rocks, which Shackleton used for ballast to stop the boat tipping over. We took the same weight of camera batteries because we made a film for Discovery Channel,
right? And
then we took a few extra rocks just to make up the weight. And it's a brutal, scary, unpleasant, harsh environment. Not for everyone.
How did you pick the crew?
So that was a process of a few years, and basically I look for people who who are sort of selfless. They're prepared to work for one another. They've obviously got to have top skills. So, we had, fantastic round-the-world sailor, another sailor with 7 world records in sailing. My climbing partner, Baz, is former regimental sergeant major for the Royal Marines, which is an elite regiment. He's a fantastic mountaineer. Another guy who's a great boat builder, and another guy who'd summited Everest 3 times and is the UK's former free diving champion, so single breath, diving as deep as you can. He was the guy who kept the cameras going on board the boat.
Pretty qualified crew.
Really qualified crew.
I probably wouldn't have made it.
You never know.
Maybe.
You never know. It depends. Let's see what skills you got.
Yeah.
And people say, look, is that cheating a bit? Because, they were, is it unfair to stack the deck in your favor with some really good people? And I said, well, who do you reckon the original guys were? They were no kind of muppets. They were
the best of
top
the time.
Of the best of the best,
Right.
So we were just trying to live up to, the very high bar that these guys had set.
Yeah, and Shackleton's story is so remarkable to me because he, different than Mawson, feels like a real explorer. Mawson seems to me more like an academic researcher type that became an explorer. Like Shackleton just had a thirst for adventure, and he was really just an amazing leader. And I'm curious, for you, what was more challenging? The lonely solitude of Mawson's voyage, just trekking across the Antarctic, or the communal leadership challenge of having to guide, this handful of men?
The communal one, definitely. I think in time, believe me, I had some very, very dark times on the solo trip. But I think when you're with such a high performing team, and you're trying to show leadership, when often you're not the expert in any of the niche areas any of the niche situations you're faced with, like big sea state. I mean, you're at night in this boat that's threatening to capsize. You're about 14, 15 inches above the surface of the sea, and you've got mountains of water crashing in on you, and you can't even see what's going on. And I'm not the best sailor on the boat. I'm probably the second worst sailor on the boat. Baz, my climbing partner, probably being the worst. If I could say that, I could
should have brought me. You would have been the third worst.
A legend in every other respect, but I mean, he and I were probably the worst sailors.
Right.
And you're trying to show some leadership, telling guys how to suck eggs who know far more than you about that stuff. And it's actually, you've got to really be confident in your own skin to be able to give advice to people who know technically more than you do about particular topics. So
right.
It's really challenging.
Yeah, it's interesting that the leadership component was, would you say, was more lonely than being actually alone?
Yes,
Why?
Yeah. Leadership is a lonely place because you have to present a very confident exterior. As soon as you start doubting your ability to pull something off, other people see it in your eyes. They see it in you, and that's a problem. But you have no one else to talk to, and you're on a boat in closer than you and I are sitting. We've got 6 guys living in the space the size of a queen-size double bed, but it's rocks.
Yeah.
With a quarter of an inch of wooden planks between us and certain death in the Southern Ocean. So you're in this real pressure cooker situation. You've got no one to. It's all in your head,
right?
And you've got to be outwardly confident, and that's far more lonely than being on your own, where you can scream and shout and lose it, and it doesn't undermine anybody else's confidence in you. It's just you.
Yeah.
On your own.
What was the darkest day?
We had some dark moments. I mean, I think storms at sea where we didn't think we were going to make it. They were pretty interesting. I think when we got to South Georgia, when we realised that 3 other guys were in such poor shape they couldn't continue, and that sort of was a problem because we'd intended there were sort of 3 sailors, 3 climbers in the 6-person team, and the idea was if we got to South Georgia, the 3 climbers, of which I am one, would remain in the old gear. The 3 sailors, meanwhile, would put on modern stuff, brought in by a yacht that kind of rendezvoused with us at the island, and 2 cameramen from Discovery Channel wearing all the modern stuff would be on that yacht. Anyway, basically, it was a really complex plan. It all went wrong, just like Shackleton. We lost 3 of our guys to really bad. Had very bad feet, frostbite, and that sort of stuff, trench foot, where your toes are just totally swollen and distended and you can't do anything. And that just threw all the planning out the window. Then we had 5 days of the worst weather South Georgia can throw at you. We had, 150, knot winds, 85 knot, 150 kilometre an hour winds, blew away everything. Had to shelter in a cave. 5 days pinned down by the worst weather you can get, gusting up to almost 200 kilometers an hour,
Insane.
100 miles an hour winds. It was just a really dark time because, again, people are looking at you saying, okay, now what? You tell me what's going to happen,
And why didn't you quit?
Oh, you never quit. But you just, all you need is to summon up the resolve to take the next step. That's all you got to do. You just got to kind of keep. If you get to a point where you just can't see your way through it, you just retreat back into routine, or you just find a way just to stick it out for another 10 minutes and another 10 minutes, another 10 minutes, another hour.
Yeah.
And then hopefully you come out the other side and momentum carries you forward.
The group camaraderie component I thought was so interesting in reading the book that Shackleton, at one point, one of the men, I forget who, was a really qualified banjo player.
Yeah,
he was excellent at the banjo.
Yeah, that's right.
And at one point, they're basically cutting down all their rations. They're like, hey, what food do we take? What supplies do we take? We're about to go to Elephant Island. What do we do? And one of the guys with the banjo said, yeah, I'll throw the banjo away. And he goes, no. Keep the banjo. He goes, but I can carry 3 more pounds of food. He goes, no. The banjo is more important for the group camaraderie than any amount of food that you can carry.
It's so important. I mean, what it says to people, apart from the music and that sort of stuff, is it says that, if you've got enough spare capacity to take a musical instrument, you obviously don't think you're going to die, Mm-hmm. It's like when Shackleton was on the ice after the ship had gone down. You don't play soccer if you think you're just about to die. Right. And it made people feel that he had things under control at some level. And if you're sitting there playing a bit of music, it's uplifting, but you also think, hey, everything's okay, it kind of normalizes.
It probably zaps you back to home a little too.
Yeah.
Like,
takes you away from the place.
Yeah, I'm not on an ice floe somewhere in the Antarctic. I'm at a pub. I'm with my friends. Like there's some type of a deeper human component.
Very clever. That's Shackleton all over. Emotional intelligence is the number one thing he had, which is understanding how people worked. Mm-hmm. And if I was asked to say what the one take home was, I'd say that he knew that everybody was different in the team. Everyone in the team is an individual. They've all got their own hopes, aspirations, motivations, strengths, weaknesses. You've got to understand who that person is and speak to them in language that really kind of works for them to get them to want to be part of the communal effort to try and achieve the goal. You don't just kind of use a one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah, I've heard similar things before. It's interesting you say that. Like I've heard people say, in order to lead a man, you have to know what leads a man.
That's right. It's absolutely right.
And to really know someone at their core is the only way that you can get them to follow you.
That's right. That's right. And I mean, look, in my role as a climate scientist, basically, it's funny how we don't do that. We use kind of guilt and fear to try and move the world forward in terms of dealing with climate change. But actually, we need to take a leaf out of Shackleton's book and make the message a little bit more personalized to the audience whose behavior you see to change, right? You've got to be a bit cleverer with it.
Yeah, I think that's great perspective. Now, I'm curious. I'm not an explorer. I'm not an adventurer. Despite how I look today.
You do look. You look ready.
I dress for you. I want you to know.
Yeah, it's good. I'm touched.
But I'm curious. What lessons can I take away from these men to become a better leader myself? How can I be a better man myself? And how can I, basically take components of this to apply to my own personal life?
Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, I think the things that Shackleton stood for are very good. I mean, I think he was selfless, so he always put others first. I mean, as I say, he gave up on the goal of reaching South Pole, even though it was his life's ambition, just so he would save everybody, really. So he was very, very, very selfless. He was eternally optimistic, and he said, "Optimism is true moral courage," he said. And he always saw a positive in any situation. So I think it's a very good skill for life. If you have problems, we all have them that come our way, there's two ways of reacting to them. One, we can sort of be broken by them and think, oh, wasn't it bad? Haven't I been dealt a bad hand? Or you can go, you know what, if I can overcome this, it makes me a better person for having been able to overcome that problem. We used that when we had bad weather. We thought, bad weather, closer to what Shackleton had. 3 guys drop out. We didn't say, hey, that's ruined the expedition. We said, well, he crossed the mountains with 3 guys because 3 of his guys had bad feet after the boat journey and brings us closer to him. So you're always looking for sort of positives out of any situation. I think being adaptable is very important in life. Mm-hmm. Having a why. The rest is detail. You have why you're doing something. Yeah. The how you do it can change in accordance with the landscape. But if you've got a why and an actual kind of, a real purpose-driven kind of goal in life or in business or whatever it is you're seeking to do, the how can change in accordance with the landscape, and that's really, really important.
Absolutely.
That's
a great point.
And having the right people there with you for the journey, And, Shackleton said for his perhaps apocryphal advert looking for people for the big expedition team, he said, men wanted the hazardous journey, months of bitter cold, darkness, low wages, honor and recognition in case of success, safe return, doubtful. Wow. Right, that was the advert that ran, and he got 3,000 applicants for 27 places. Right? Wow. And, on the one level you think, well, that's a bit of fun. On the other hand, it was such clever framing because he said, look, if you want to come and, meet interesting people and go to interesting places, maybe this isn't for you. If you want to come and have a brutal, challenging life experience, at the time you may not enjoy it, but you come out of it a better person. And he got that kind of person who came forward for the journey. So I think that ability to challenge your team, be selfless as a person, don't ask people to do stuff you're not prepared to do yourself, have those clever kind of psychological games that you can play, understand how people tick. Mm-hmm. These are all great attributes of a good leader, I think.
Yeah. And do you apply these things to your own life outside of your expedition?
I really find I do. Yeah. You find you meet you meet people in a particular situation, in my role in climate science or whatever, and you think, I'll ask a few questions and work out kind of what motivates that person, where they're at on the spectrum of kind of, believing in the issue, whether they want to act on it, whether they're, opposed to it, and then you speak using kind of language you think is going to really resonate with them to get them to maybe change their position. So you're kind of working in that way. You break the total down into manageable pieces. If that's a message for expeditions, just like it is for life or dealing with climate change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's your new why, I guess. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it is. My expeditions now, I mean, I went back, by the way, to South Georgia one more time, a bit like Shackleton. He sadly died when he went back on his 4th expedition. So the 3rd one that he led, he died of a heart attack at the same place, at the scene of his greatest victory. It was very, very...
poetic and all.
Poetic, I mean, his whole life was grand theatre on the largest of scales.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
For him he died of a heart attack the night he arrived at the scene of that victory. It's just totally remarkable.
And the fact he went back in the first place, he overcame the greatest survival voyage of all time, and then said, "I'm not finished."
Went back for more.
I think he enlisted in like World War I, like fought in the war for a little or something, and then
he did. It's interesting. They got back, but he was by that stage. He was 41,
right?
And 41 back in 1914 was like 61.
Yeah.
So he was deemed to be too old to do active service. So he did some interesting jobs, but he wasn't firing guns. And so I think he came back feeling dissatisfied with his role in the war, perhaps, and feeling that he still had more to give. And so he went back down in 1922 for one more roll of the dice.
Yeah. And that's where he's buried today.
That's where he's buried. And I was down there for the 100th anniversary of his death earlier this year. It was a very powerful moment down at the grave.
Yeah, can you tell me about that?
Yes, I mean, look, I was invited to come. I was given the opportunity to come. I went on actually 2 trips south this season that's just gone, so sort of November of last year through to January of this year. First one, I was there with Conrad Anker, who's a great legend of mountaineering from here in the US. He's the one who discovered the body of George Mallory on Everest, the guy who may have made it before Hillary.
Right.
A remarkable guy, both Mallory and Conrad. And then the second voyage I went was specifically to go to see the grave and be there with some other people who had sort of paid to come, I guess.
And some of Shackleton's family was there as well, right?
Not on this occasion, but I have met his granddaughter at the grave. I met her after our expedition. She happened to be on a ship in Antarctica, and we rendezvoused at the grave after our expedition and had this wonderful 1 hour before the weather just went to shit, where we just couldn't do anything, where she arrived, we arrived, we were at the grave, had a moment, both went our separate ways, and then the weather went to shit, and that was it. It was incredibly powerful. Incredibly powerful.
Those types of like poetic coincidences that occur are so fascinating.
It's incredible. Even our expedition, we left on the anniversary, on the date of his, on the day in the calendar of his death, and we finished our expedition on his birthday.
Wow.
If that's not a death to rebirth story, I don't know what is. I mean, it was really powerful.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing. And this entire journey was documented for Discovery Channel.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, we did a book with HarperCollins, and we did a PBS Discovery Channel 3-part series.
That's amazing.
Called Chasing Shackleton in this country, and Shackleton Death or Glory, it's called in Europe. But it was good.
Well, that's remarkable. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I know you have to fly to London soon.
Yeah, my next great challenge.
Yeah, exactly.
Middle seat on United in coach.
Tim Jarvis, thank you so much for spending time with me and sharing these stories with me. This is the coolest thing. Just hanging out with an adventurer and learning, man.
Come along on the next one.
I would love to. I really, it's one of my life's goals to go to Antarctica. I would love to. When the time comes, can I reach out to you?
Sure.
Oh man, I can't wait. I'll see you there. Thank you so much.
Thanks.